And here we go, it's time for part 3 of the RC Model Reviews FPV Backpack Build video series. And today we're looking at the camera, and this is it. This is the Security Camera 2000 camera. I think the number is a PZ0420-P. And if you are unfamiliar with this camera, then go and look at the video, whose URL you'll see along the bottom of the screen here. That's the review of this camera that I published on this channel not so long ago. Now these are brilliant little cameras, 600 TV lines, which means pretty good resolution, and they have a thing called wide dynamic range, which is really good. It basically means that you don't have the bright sky making the ground go black. But enough about that camera. What are we going to do with it? Well, the camera itself comes with a set of leads, and these are the leads. Now look at that. It's way too heavy, way too bulky, way too long. Now what you get here are a number of connectors that we're not going to use. This is what's called a BNC connector, and it's commonly used for radio frequency connections and sometimes for video. It's quite a big connector, it's heavy, a lot of metal in there, no good for our lightweight backpack. And here we have a traditional or standard bullet or barrel connector for the, 12 volts DC. Now neither of those is going to be suitable. The bit that plugs into the camera is this tiny little connector here, which is more on what we're looking for. But what we need to do, of course, is get rid of all these big heavy connectors and these big thick leads. We want something that is a little more in keeping with the lightweight fashion of our backpack, and we're going to do what a lot of people have done with their FPV cameras. Move stuff out of the way. We're going to use one of these to connect our camera to our FPV backpack board when we've made it. This is a pretty standard 6-inch 150mm servo extension lead. This one is a Futaba type, which means it has a little ridge along the side here that stops you plugging it in backwards. And there are two types of servo extensions. There's the JR type and the Futaba type. The Futaba type you can plug it in the right way around, that's fine, but if you try and plug it in the wrong way, it just will not go. You cannot plug them in the wrong way around, and that's important because we don't want to plug our camera in backwards. Although it won't damage a servo, it could damage our camera, so use the Futaba extensions. If you've bought yourself an AXN, you may find that it had some extensions in there, but they're probably the JR ones. So you can buy these, are cheap as beans. I think it's like, $2 for 10 or something, most of the online retailers. And what we're going to do, of course, is we're going to take one extension, we're going to cut it in half. One half will go and join onto that other lead that I've just gone and lost. You can't see it anywhere. Here it is. We're going to connect this end onto the wires that come from this plug, and the other end we're going to connect up to the PC board for our FPV backpack. So as I say, we're going to have to cut this lead, and why not cut it in the middle? Seems as good a place as any. So remember, you're going to need some side cutters. That's my side cutters. We're also going to need to do this job, we're going to need to join some wires, so we need some solder. There we go, good old solder, as I've mentioned before. Going to need the soldering iron to do the soldering, pretty obvious. And we're also going to need some heat shrink, because we don't want bare wires hanging around. Heat shrink will make the job much nicer and neater when we're done. So there we go. Now, what we have to do, of course, is cut this lead as well, because we're going to add our lead on there. Cut it anywhere along here. Here we go. This bit, you can throw that away. You're not going to be using that ever again. Put it in the rubbish. Gone. Here we have our servo extension in 2 halves. Now, I like to put the female, I suppose it is, the side that takes the bit that you plug into, I like to put that end on the camera, because the other end has got all its wires shielded, and that's the bit that's going to be carrying the power from our backpack. So by putting this onto the backpack, there's no chance we can accidentally short out power, but this has some connectors inside. If you look carefully inside, you can see there are some wires poking out. If a piece of solder or something got in there, you could short out the wires or the power from our backpack. So we want this on the camera and this on the backpack. Here we go. So now what we've got to do is actually pare away. This has got some heat shrink on it. We need a sharp knife or our side cutters, and we need to pare away the old heat shrink on here. And you'll see that these wires are actually pretty simple. It's not a complicated job. And you notice also that there we go. You notice also that the wires on the connector are coloured. The wires we've got here are coloured, and that colouring is pretty much a convention. Just cut away. Probably a knife would be a better idea, but I can't find my knife at the moment. I used it for something and it's gone. Here we go. So here's what we get. We take the heat shrink off there. That is the Red wire is the positive voltage, which will be 12 volts coming from our FPV backpack. The black wire is the negative and also earth for the video signal, and the yellow wire is the video signal itself. Now if you look carefully at this wire, you'll see that the yellow and the red wire actually will slide out of the, if you cut it in the right place, it is just maybe an inch or 25 millimeters from the end there, you can pull out the yellow and the red wires, and you'll see that the black wire is actually soldered on to the braid on there. So all we have to do is actually cut that off with our trusty side cutters, like so. And there are the 3 wires that we're going to be connecting up to our extension lead. Now a very important point, don't forget this because you'll kick yourself if you do. Get yourself some heat shrink, which is big enough to slide over the servo extension wire. Just a nice snug fit on there is what you want. And if you don't put this on now, it's not so bad actually. You'll probably slide it over this little connector later, but it's a tight fit to get it over there. So it's much easier to put it onto the servo extension now rather than curse yourself later when you realise you've forgotten it and it's too late to put it on. You'll have to unsolder everything. Now there are 2 ways to join these wires together. You can actually cut them all the same length and then use individual pieces of heat shrink over each wire, but that seems to take too long if you ask me. Or you can stagger the joins and then just run a single piece of heat shrink right over, which is what I'm going to do. So we need to split our extension wires. So we have 3 separated wires like so. Yeah. And what we do is we start with the negative wire, and we just need to join that together. Take the insulation off. I only need a very small amount of insulation off. You can use a wire strip if you like, but after a while I find that just using these side cutters works fine for me. And then of course put a bit of solder on there. I've already showed you how to tin wires, so I shall endeavour to tin this while staying out of the way so you can see what I'm doing with any luck. There we go. Now it's not uncommon for the plastic to melt back a little bit when you tin this wire. This has got a kind of a plastic insulation on it, so it's not very heat proof. It's not like the wire that you might find on your servo extensions or the motor wires on your electric model. Now I'll tin the other wire, the other black wire, because it's black to black. Pretty straightforward. There we go. So we've tinned those 2 wires. Now we can do that sweating together that I've mentioned before, where both wires have got solder on them. So all we have to do is hold them together and apply some heat, and it should all just melt together nicely without having to add any more solder. Of course, it always helps if you've got 3 or 4 sets of hands. I only have 1, so I'll do my best to use that one to get the required results. And I'm old and I've had too much coffee today, so I'm shaking like mad, which is not a good look. Oh, this is terrible. Too much coffee. I should have done this in the morning. No, actually I might have to put a bit more solder on this one. Ooh, not quite enough. There we go. Rightio, that's soldered that wire together quite nicely. So there we go. That one's done. Now, of course, what we do is we stagger the other one. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the red wire, which corresponds to the red wire on the extension, and I'm going to take it along so it's the join will be past this one. Move it past that join so that when they're pushed together by the heat shrink, they're not going to touch. So I'll give about this much length on the red wire, and then when I lay it out, I can simply chop my other red wire there at about the right length, so that when I lay them together, they overlap very slightly, but the actual soldered joints are staggered. So there we go. Let's probably need a little bit more off this wire here, just to get it dead right. Then I will take some insulation off and do some tinning. I'll probably cut this out because it's all boring and repetitive stuff, and you don't really need to see me do the same thing over and over again. Makes the video far too long. Here we go. There we go. Tin that up. And of course you have to pare back a bit of the insulation on the wire from the camera. And this is a bit harder to do this stuff because it is plastic. It doesn't tear as nicely as the as the silicon type insulation that we've got on the extension. But there you go, that's done. Tin it up like so. Now if I lay these side by side, just like I did with the other one, they should go together very nicely with the application of just a little bit of heat. And I need more fingers. More fingers and more hands are required. Now, some people will tend to use a little device that lets you position everything before you solder it together. I just use my hands. Become very dexterous doing this. So there we go. You see now what we've got here. It's not perfect, but it's close enough for this demonstration. Is we've got two soldered joins on the one wire, on the one piece of cable. They're staggered, so we're only going to need one piece of heat shrink. One piece of heat shrink to cover the whole lot, and that's what this big piece here is going to do. Only one left to do now, and that is the yellow, which will join onto the white. So again, I just cut it so that it's just past there, and then I can cut the white wire so there's just the slightest bit of overlap here, just enough overlap that the ends will touch. It's a little bit hard to do. Unfortunately, they don't line up exactly because we're putting the side of the middle of the one connector to the outer wire of another, so I'll just have to eyeball it here. I'm sure this will work just fine. Just don't want to cut it too short because you can always make them shorter, but you can't make them longer. There we go. A little bit more off that one. And cut a little bit of the insulation away. Tin it up like so. There we go. And do the same with the yellow wire as we did before. Strip away some of that yellow insulation like so. Tin that up. You may want to take a little more time doing this than I'm doing because you won't be in as much of a hurry as me. And also you can get your lengths dead right then. You can mess around to your heart's content, make sure you're happy with the length and everything. I'm just doing this quick for the video. There we go. So there's our three wires, and as you can see I've got some of them a little bit too long, but it doesn't really worry me. And you can slide your heat shrink down. That last one wasn't very good. I think I'll do that again. They're not parallel. They actually overlap a bit. So here we go. That's a better joint. Much better. So now I can slide my heat shrink along, and I can apply the heat from my heat gun if I have one. Or in this case I just have my soldering iron. So you just roll it up and down along the barrel of your soldering iron like this. If you want to save having to go and get your heat gun. This needs to move up a bit. There we go. Like so. That then basically means no bare wires are exposed. All your soldered joints are protected. And now, instead of having that big bulky cable that was otherwise going to plug into your camera, you've got this nice dainty little one. And it still plugs in to the little connection, which is here, like so. There we go, that's our camera, that's the work for our camera. Now we have a camera with a tiny little light lead on there that will plug straight into our backpack. This lead will go on, this one here will go onto the backpack, we'll wire that onto the backpack board, and it will plug into the camera. Now, this is probably a little long. You might want this shorter. You can just cut these lengths to suit yourself, but if you leave it a bit longer, it gives you a bit more room to perhaps position things in your model. And as I say, when you want to extend your camera further from the backpack, then you just put an extension between these two leads. Just unplug it from the backpack, put an extension in whatever length you want, within reason. So that's it. And of course, remember, when you put your camera in, you set it up with this board, then you unplug this board so you only have the camera board on your model. So that's wiring up the camera. Keep this lead, of course. Keep this, because in the next build video, we're going to be using that on the FPV backpack circuit board, the transmitter, video transmitter circuit board. And that's the one that's coming up next. So thank you for watching. Stay tuned. Next part of the build video is coming up shortly.